we love to say, Black people are not a monolith. And I'm like, yes, we are individuals in all of the ways, but there are some ways that we need to be a monolith. Like there are some ways where everybody need to get in formation and we need to be on the same page, the hymnal, and I need you to be on Amazing Grace and not wade in the water.
Ever wonder what it takes to unlock true Black innovation and wealth creation? You're in the right place.
This is From Chains to Links, where the brightest Black minds, entrepreneurs, academics, creatives, and futurists reimagine what it means to build generational wealth in a thriving Black community.
We're not just talking about change, we're building it. Stick around because this conversation is about to spark something different.
Welcome back to From Chains to Links. I am Kelly Burton, your co-host, and I am here with the amazing Ifeoma Ike. Hey, girl.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good. Season 2.
I'm telling you.
Never made it.
We made it. Hallelujah. And we are here with a mutual friend, and I love when this happens, but I'm also kind of nervous a little bit because we might go like deep into sister girl territory because we have history. That's good though.
Sister Girl's great.
Sister Girl.
It's the era of the political sister girl.
Yes. Hey, Katrina.
Hello.
Katrina Gamble is here with us, and she is the CEO of Sojourn Strategies, and she is my good friend. You know when you go through things with a person, and Katrina and I went to graduate school together at Emory University back in the day, and we made it.
We made it.
And it's so good to be here with you. And you and Ify go back a little bit too in the same space.
We do.
Yes.
Similar space. We were on the ground during movement in Ferguson. And that's where we first met, I think.
Yes.
Getting shot at.
Yeah.
Literally.
Tear gassed.
And when everybody was like, what is our next move to do something? Katrina and I were the lone ones in the corner like, we need a civic engagement strategy. And everybody said no. And so, but then we became friends.
We did. And we did projects together.
And we did a lot of projects together.
Yes.
Yep.
And Kelly actually helped me build my business.
Oh, yes.
I always like to give you that shout out.
Oh, I appreciate
I
it.
love
when you
that.
did the Founders of Color
Founders of
cohort
Color.
and you helped me get my life together.
Oh,
so thank
my
you.
God.
I appreciate you.
That work was so life affirming in so many ways. But Founders of Color preceded Black Innovation Alliance. And that is the work that we're really trying to scale.
That's
in
where
this
I met
moment,
you.
Right?
Yeah, I met you when you were doing Founders of Color. Yeah.
Ah, yes. So full circle in a lot of ways. But today, we're talking about the future of Black politics.
Yeah.
And it's a good time to be having that conversation, right?
It is.
This is a moment.
It is a moment.
It's a moment.
It is a moment, but we're trying to turn it into a movement.
Yeah.
So
You are talking our language. That is our love language at Black Innovation Alliance. So let's talk about it because one of my pet peeves, I tend to get on a bit of a soapbox, is we love to say, Black people are not a monolith. And I'm like, yes, we are individuals in all of the ways, but there are some ways that we need to be a monolith. Like there are some ways where everybody need to get in formation and we need to be on the same page, the hymnal, and I need you to be on Amazing Grace and not wade in the water. You know what I'm saying? Can we just all kind of, see, I'm doing the most, get on the same page? So that is my question to you. And this is going to kind of be the frame for our conversation today. When do we need to stand in our individuality and when do we need to kind of get on the same page? So that's the high level. Come on, get me together. Tell me where I need to do better.
So I agree with you that there are definitely moments where we need to come together as a community. But the reality is, as you said, we're all different people and not all of us are on the same page. Not all of us have the same values. So when we're thinking about that way forward, that's why I do think people kind of go back to this idea that not all Black people are monolith, because if you're trying to build a movement with people, you have to understand who your people are. And not all Black people are going to be trying to build towards the same movement, I think is the reality.
And in your work, you talk a good bit about that segmentation. Can you say a little bit more about the nuances of the kind of Black community, especially when it comes to showing up politically? And what are some things that we're missing?
Yes. So we actually just launched some research last week called Black Values Survey. And it's because of this very thing, right? Typically in the political industry, people think of Black people as all the same and they treat us as if we're all the same, which means they show up right about now in September and use the same message for all Black people to turn out to vote. And we know that we're not. So we actually did a pretty deep dive where we talked to Black registered voters, Black unregistered voters, and we asked them questions that have absolutely nothing to do with party or ID. We asked them about how do they want to show up for their ancestors? What are the things that they value? What do they see as their power in our democracy? And when you do that, you find out that not all Black people are the same.
What surprised you the most?
What surprised me the most? Well, I don't know if this surprised me, but it definitely affirmed. There's one segment that we found that we call secular progressives. They are highly educated, mostly Black women. They definitely have questions about the system, but they show up anyway. So it was not a surprise, but it was affirming to see so clearly the Black women that we often see out doing the work for our people, and there was clear measures that identified them in the Black electorate. So that was cool.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a good friend of ours, Dr. Brittany Cooper, who talks a lot about how you should get into these conversations about what is working, what is not working, and then you should also really think about who is going to help us get the most for the most of us. In that research that you were seeing, and then the values, were you seeing polarization between individuals that have like these almost like individual mindsets, if you will, versus this collective mindset as to what we all deserve? Because when you were talking about those that are more educated, there is also this argument that like those individuals are closer to the resources, that they could make more individual decisions. But we see with Black women that also, skew a little higher on being more educated. They're still voting in a very collective way, even for individuals that are outside of their like socio-demographic. So did you see some of that, or is it genderized? Are there things that, surprised you about that?
Yes, I love that you asked this question. So we definitely saw that. And that was actually there are several questions that we put into the survey that you typically wouldn't see in a political survey that ask questions like that about how much power do you think the Black community has? We asked people about how much they identify as being Black, how much do they think what happens to other Black people relates to them? And there are definitely differences. There was one segment that we call the rightfully cynical that I think is one of the most interesting. And that group, they have very low social trust. They also are less likely to think that as Black people, if we come together, that we can actually impact change. I don't say that they don't identify as Black, but their Black identity is less strong. But that's also the segment, to your point, is they have lower levels of resources, lower levels of education. They are more likely to say that they've had negative encounters with police. So the system has failed them, which is part of the reason why we call them rightfully cynical. And so I think, but they are looking for a home. They're looking for a place. They just haven't found it. So I think they're skeptical of most people, but I think if the right people talk to them, they could be brought into community.
And I'm smiling because like that was the research we did on Black political homes. For those that don't know what is a Black political home, like how would you define what a Black political home is and why it's so important at this moment?
Right. I think it's a little bit what Kelly was talking about at the beginning when you're like, we all need to get information together. But it is that. It is a place where Black people can come together, especially folks who have shared values, and not only take action. So it's not just about moving people to do something, but also where we can build community and connection. So when we think about it, it's both about movement and it's about elections. It's a combination of things. So it's a space where people can feel this kind of strong sense of belonging with other Black folks, but actually to get stuff done.
Yeah.
So how do we get that momentum? Because to your point, when you say people tend to show up around now, there's a lot of money that's invested in get out the vote. And there's a lot of energy directed towards the Black electorate. But then November the 12th or the 9th or the 13th, right? There is not similar investment in ensuring that whatever was built in that time comes together in some form of, political home versus a stop along the way, right? Or a pop-up tent. And we all up in here together, and then everybody disperses. And then every 2 to 4 years, we all in here together, and some defections. How do we break that cycle?
I think that, well, one, I don't think we can depend on the political industry to do that for us. That's just the reality.
Agreed.
So we got to build our spaces. And I think there are groups all across the country that are doing that.
Black Innovation Alliance.
Yes. I was about to say, right?
Shameful plug.
No, it was not shameful at all.
Unshameful.
Totally rightfully so. That's what it is. Like, we have to create spaces for our people, and whatever that looks like Black Innovation Alliance, so that we are not setting people up for that disappointment, right? Which is what creates the cynicism, is that people show up and they're like, oh, if you turn out and vote and the world's going to change, and then they disappear, and then they see them again in 2 years. And the reality is that there needs to be this kind of space where we're building community, where people can do things in the between times, that keeps people connected.
And what does that look like? Because, I remember in graduate school, I would think, wow, there's so much invested in the vote. But being politically active is so much more than the vote. So what are some other ways that folks can show up and do show up in the meantime and in between time?
Right. So I'll give you a good example. Really inspired by the research that Ife and I did around Black political homes. I did some research where I was talking to Black folks in Louisiana, and they are part of this organization called Vote that organizes formerly incarcerated people in Louisiana. And if you don't know that organization, they are a powerhouse. They get stuff done. And when I was there talking to some of the members of that organization, one of the members literally said, I'm going to be a member of this organization until the wheels fall off, because they felt so connected. And the types of things that they do is they offer leadership development. They don't only get people to vote, they teach them how to show up and testify. They organize around, they provide resources for people when they're returning back home. And so they think of it as a family. So there's lots of things that we can do besides voting. I know you all have your policy platform. So in between elections, actually talking to your elected officials, training people about how to do that so they can tell their stories. So there's lots of things outside of elections that people can do to make a difference.
Beautiful.
I think we're trying to be a little bit more spicy this year. So I'm happy for anyone to push back or jump in. The experience that a lot of people feel is like twofold. One is like this external fight of like, the system has never worked for us. But there's also these subtle hints of, and also Black people that have a little bit more education and resources also don't understand what I'm going through. And I think sometimes we don't talk about how sometimes when people are saying they want a political home, they're also speaking about the times when they can be free to be more Black than political, right? And oftentimes we're not always honest about the fact that while there's a lot of action that needs to be done on the civic engagement front, a lot of times people need some of those social emotional support that has nothing to do directly with politics, but has everything to do with how people feel at home.
Yes.
And want to get a sense as to like how immensely frustrating the concept of home is for Black people throughout the diaspora, here especially. Just highlighting that when you were talking about folks in New Orleans, because there are a lot of different groups. Power Coalition is another group that comes to mind. And like they have times when they're just coming to brunch to just kind of like be with each other, helping mothers, helping trans women, just like seeing them for who they are as Black, and not necessarily talking all the times about the change we need to make, which I think does something to people's nervous system sometimes. I don't know if you feel that way, but.
Yes, of course, always dropping the gems, of course. No, I 100% agree. And actually, when I first started doing the research and I was talking about political home, and most people were like, what is that? And I actually shifted the focus to start talking about this idea of belonging, because it is exactly that. People are looking for a place where they feel connected, where they feel safe. That comes up a lot. where they feel seen, to your point. And a lot of that is not necessarily about what they're doing. It's about how they're feeling in a space. So I do think it's like one of those things that I think we in the political industry, or folks who do work in the political industry, don't pay enough attention to is culture. So if you want to get someone to do something, you actually have to engage them in a way that they feel connected. And I think things like these brunches, actually demonstrating that you care about the people that you're organizing with, seems like it seems obvious, but to your point, I think that's 100% correct. And we actually say that that's the starting place to building a political home, is that you have to create a sense of belonging for people.
I love that.
I feel that sometimes we can cycle the same conversations over and over again. And I'm curious, what do you think is a conversation we need to have more? We need to talk about more? And what's a conversation we need to just put to the back burner that just takes up way too much oxygen in our community?
It's actually what Ify said, that I think the thing that we need to talk more about is how some of these class differences, and also how and what that translates into in terms of like how people feel connected or disconnected, and like what that means, right? So to this point of, if we're trying to build a movement or space where we actually can have an impact on things that affect our people, then I think we have to be really real about what that looks like when we show up in different spaces. And one of the things that, especially after we did some of this research and we had some conversations with what we call the rightfully cynical in Ohio, it was like clear to me that you can't try to gaslight people out of their cynicism and just say, you need to have hope when their like daily life is a struggle. And so there's a bit of having some real conversations about how we acknowledge that cynicism, what that means for people, before we try to pivot to try to make them do something, vote, show up in this way, because that is a real, it's a reality for people.
Yeah, and I think that's why the home piece is so important. Like if you think about work, right, in general, people go to work and there's a lot of ways that it meets a lot of needs, but it's not home. There's a reason why coming home has a way of grounding and rest and reminder. And sometimes, while I think we're all agreed here that movement and politics, and trying to build a movement around politics is almost like, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, that's simple, but it's not easy, because both of those spaces, and especially the organizers that do a lot of that work, often are struggling to find a home after they do that work. And oftentimes those two sides are fighting amongst each other. Politics looks at movement like, what's the point of this? You all aren't doing anything. Movement looks at politics like, we have repeated evidence of this not necessarily getting us our civil rights. And so there's also this this need for a middle ground at times to be mediators. And that's why it was so comforting to see somebody like you in Ferguson, because it's like we oftentimes see those two sides as being very, very separate. So as we're moving forward and thinking about what the future of Black politics needs to look like, what are some of the practices and agreements, but also space for understanding, right? For people, some people are really deep organizers in like those spaces and see them politically as different. What are some of the ways that we can build a little bit of like elasticity between the two?
Right. Yeah, and some people might say this is like middling, but I am always a believer in both.
Yeah.
Right. That ultimately we do need both. And I mean, and because, right, movement is what gives us vision for possibility. And some of the practical organizing is what gives us the wins to sustain the movement towards the vision. So we need both. Right. So I agree with you. And I think one thing I would say is people, it's fine to have your lane, and everybody, I think that may be some of where we fail, is like trying to drag all people who are in movement over to hardcore politics and the movement folks being frustrated because people who do politics don't get them. And the reality is not everybody's going to fit in the middle. But I think the place that's the middle is this, I love that you said, like, this idea of coming home. Like, what does that look like? Places of care, places where we can connect in ways that aren't necessarily about an ask of what we want people to do, but it's just like building relationships, because I really think ultimately that is what will sustain us. So, you know, like you said, the brunches, places of gathering, how do we use music to build connection? How do we take care of people? You know, that came up during the pandemic, a lot of the mutual aid work, but there's ways in which we can demonstrate care for people and create community that isn't always about, on the back end, what we're asking them to do. Mm-hmm, so once you've built community, then it's much easier to translate that into movement and action.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What areas of the work would you say require the deepest investment?
That part.
Which is the soft part, and it's so hard to get folks, at least that's been our experience, to understand the soft aspects of it. I mean, we're on a wellness journey, even with our membership, because this work is hard. And the last year in this space has been beyond challenging. And folks are dealing with all sorts of anxiety and angst and fear and grief. But to say, we need XYZ for care and wellness and trauma remediation, that is, I'm interested, you know, we're in the process of figuring how do we build the case for that, because it's so necessary, especially among Black leaders.
Can I add something to that though? I do, sorry, this is like my grad school rant. Like, I get frustrated with the term soft because soft is genderized. Yeah. And so there's this I'm forgetting her name, but this wise professor of mine that was like, the things that people call soft or soft skills are actually the things that are called life and survivorship, right? Yeah. When you think about individuals, and I'll confess, is like the attorney who went into Wall Street and thought that I was going to be judged on my work, but it was actually judged on how you, like, you know, socialize with everybody else. That was taught to me as a soft skill, and therefore for type A masculine spaces, you need to show your work because that is a hard skill. When the reality is, I think those that have more privilege are able to maneuver in both. Yeah. And so I love that you raised that though, because I do think for a lot of us, the concept of like these things are soft versus like it's hard to maintain relationships. It's hard to maintain relationships with people that were once strangers and now you're calling them family or comrade or accomplice. And when I think of how we have to move forward, and maybe not monolithic on every issue, but monolithic as like, we're in this together. Yeah. A lot of that is like, where's the incubator? Where's the time to like build that? So I'm sorry if y'all saw me almost get out of my skin. I was like, no, Kelly, you mentioned in the life stuff. You mentioned in the manna, like that's the stuff that's going to keep us together. And I do think we enter a lot of spaces where people are like, we don't have time for that. And so we don't invest in it. And then investors don't invest in it. Right. So it feels like we need to like shake that up a little bit and say like, we're not going to survive without community, especially people that inherited no land, especially people that inherited no full rights. What we created was culture, because that was the thing we could own and we could, you know, manipulate. But that required like making the soft stuff hard. Yeah. And it's still hard. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like we get money, but that's not building. Right. It's not building power. Right. Like, you know what I mean? Right. Like more of us are more rich than our parents, but it's not building power. So then what is the thing then that's going to harden, you know what I mean? Harden the connection.
And it's people say soft, it's mostly because they feel like they can't measure it, right? And I'm a data, you know? I love data. But not everything can be measured with numbers. We know this, and that does not mean that it is not valuable. That's right. But I honestly think, to help make the case to this point, it is those soft things in terms of community, creating those sense of belonging that is foundational. And this is what I have been saying I say this to as many people who will listen to me, and they might get tired of me saying it, but I'm gonna keep saying it, is that those things is what allows us to sustain movement. So one of the things, at least from the political industry, right? Like you were talking, right? People come into spaces for all kinds of reasons. There's some big issue that's happening. There's a protest. Somebody talked about, their friend invited them. They come, but then they leave.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is it the thing that makes them stay?
Yes.
The thing that makes them stay is community.
Right.
It is that sense of home, right? So now if you think about this from like just, if you are trying to build something, do you want to be the person that's like, we bring our people in, we lose them. We bring our people in, we lose them. That's not efficient.
Right.
If you want to bring people in, keep them, bring more people in, keep them,
Girl.
bring more people in, keep them. You have to invest in community building. So that's what you say to the people who are like, well, why are we doing this? Well, because do you want us to have to re-recruit the same 10 people every 6 months? Or do you want us to keep those people and then build on those people? And the reason why people stay is because of community. That is the truth. Community and getting stuff done. You
Yes.
have to get stuff done.
Gotta
too.
get stuff done.
You need a little
Yeah.
bit. You have to have both.
Katrina.
So that's my argument.
We're building on this concept of the right to innovate.
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly want to hear what comes to your mind when you hear the right to innovate. And when you think of maybe the sub rights, like the right to innovate would mean that we could do X, what would that mean? So first, like what comes to mind, and then what would we be able to do if we had the right to innovate? Or we're actually saying we do have the right to innovate, right? So what does that mean in your practice, or just generally?
Right. For me, when I think of the right to innovate, I mean, the first thing that came to mind for me was disruption. So the right to do things differently, because what we have been doing has not worked for our people. And that's most honestly, when I think about the work, is I'm always trying to say, we don't know what we don't know. And we don't know a lot about our people because no one is invested in trying to understand us. So when I think about the work that I do, I'm always just thinking about disruption. How do we break up the status quo to better make space to innovate and really understand how we build Black political power? And that means that we have to invest in really understanding Black people and Black community.
I love that.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for joining us for From Chains to Links. We're so
Thank you for
grateful.
having me.
So grateful.
This was great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us for another episode of From Chains to Links, the right to innovate. I'm curious what y'all think. Okay, put it in the comments. We're excited about this conversation. We're going to continue it on social media, and we will see you on the next episode of From Chains to Links. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks for riding with us on today's journey. If this episode hit home, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend.
Visit FromChainsToLinks.com for more content, and make sure to subscribe on our YouTube.
Follow us on Instagram at @BuildWithBIA, and let's keep this movement growing.
The road to true Black prosperity is built together, and we need you to do it.